Money doesn't freeze. That's what Knox Aldrich kept telling himself as he watched his breath crystallize in the December air, 30 stories above New York City. At 30 years old, he was worth $2.8 billion, and not a single penny of it could warm the hollow space behind his ribs. The lights of Manhattan sparkled below like fallen stars, each one representing someone else's dreams, someone else's struggles. None of them mattered to him anymore. His corner office at Aldrich Dynamics felt more like a fortress than a workspace, all gleaming steel, pristine glass, and calculated emptiness. The only personal touch was a sleek decanter of 30-year-old scotch that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Knox poured himself a glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light from his designer desk lamp. The earnings report on his tablet showed another record-breaking quarter. His artificial intelligence patents had revolutionized the tech industry, and tomorrow's headlines would sing his praises again. Tech prodigy Knox Aldrich reshapes Silicon Valley's future. The scotch burned going down, but it couldn't touch the ice that had formed around his heart years ago. His phone lit up with another message from his mother about the upcoming winter charity ball. Delete. He'd learned his lesson about charity at 12 years old, watching his father's philanthropic vision tear their family apart. The great Phoenix Aldrich always preaching about giving back, about making a difference. All those noble intentions had landed them in a cramped walk-up in Queens, their mansion and dignity stripped away by bankruptcy courts and public scandal. Knox's fingers tightened around the crystal tumbler as the memories surfaced. He could still hear his mother crying at night, still feel the burn of embarrassment wearing second-hand clothes to his new school. That's when he'd made his vow. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford. Success was the only shield against life's cruelties, and money was its measure. He'd clawed his way up from those ashes, rebuilding the Aldrich name into something harder, colder, and unbreakable. Mr. Aldrich? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The innovation strategy meeting is starting in 5 minutes. On my way. His voice carried the sharp edge that had become his trademark. Knox Aldrich didn't waste time on pleasantries or small talk. His employees called him the Ice King behind his back, a nickname he secretly appreciated. Ice didn't break. Ice didn't feel. As he gathered his materials, something caught his eye. A small frame had been turned upright on his shelf, probably by the cleaning staff. In it, a gap-toothed boy sat on his father's shoulders at Coney Island, cotton candy sticking to both their faces. Knox slammed the photo face down. Nostalgia was just another trap, like his father's misguided idealism. The private elevator hummed as it carried him down to the conference floor. Knox used these moments to perfect his armor, the calculating gaze, the subtle suggestion of power in his stance, the aura of untouchable success that had made him the youngest billionaire in the tech sector. His reflection in the polished doors showed exactly what he'd built himself to be. A man who had everything, who needed nothing and no one. He couldn't have known that in less than an hour, his carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. That a chance encounter with a 7-year-old girl named Winter would make him question everything he'd spent 18 years believing. But for now, Knox Aldrich straightened his Brioni tie and strode toward the conference room, each click of his handcrafted Oxfords echoing with the confidence of a man who thought he'd figured out all of life's equations. The innovation strategy meeting dragged on for 2 hours, each minute marked by the soft tap of Knox's finger against his tablet screen. His team presented their quarterly projections with the precise, nervous energy of people who knew their jobs depended on exceeding expectations. Every chart showed upward trends. Every metric promised more growth, more profit, more power. Yet somehow the victories felt increasingly hollow. And finally, his head of R&D concluded, our new neural network breakthrough could increase efficiency by another 40%. Knox leaned forward slightly, his movement causing the entire room to tense. 40% isn't good enough. Google's already at 35%. I want 60% by next quarter. His words fell like ice chips into the silence. Make it happen. No one argued. No one ever did. They all knew the stories about how Knox had built Aldrich Dynamics. The competitors he'd absorbed, the rivals he'd crushed, the impossible deadlines he'd enforced. Success required sacrifice. Mercy was inefficient. As the team filed out, his assistant Harper lingered by the door. Mr. Aldrich, don't forget about the media interview at 7. And your mother called again about the charity ball. She says. Cancel the interview. Knox gathered his things, already moving toward the door. And tell my mother I'm busy. The charity ball was 3 days away, and he had no intention of attending. Let some other rich fool play Santa Claus this Christmas. The winter storm had intensified while they were in the meeting. Knox stood in the lobby, watching sheets of snow blur the city into a white haze. His driver wouldn't be able to get through this weather for at least an hour. Normally, he would wait in his office, but suddenly the thought of those pristine white walls felt suffocating. "I'm going for coffee," he announced to Harper, who looked startled by this break in routine. "Push everything back." "But sir, the storm." Knox was already pushing through the revolving doors, the bitter wind stealing his breath. The cold hit him like a physical force, but it felt right somehow. Familiar. The same high-end coffee shop he ordered from daily was just 2 blocks away. He could handle 2 blocks. The streets were nearly empty, most people having the sense to stay inside. Snow crunched under his expensive shoes, already soaking through the Italian leather. Wind whipped between the buildings, carrying flurries of white that stung his face. Knox pulled his cashmere scarf tighter, hunching against the gale. Halfway to the coffee shop, he heard it, a soft sound almost lost in the storm. A cough, small and weak, coming from the entrance of an alley. Knox kept walking. Whatever it wasn't his problem. He had learned long ago that looking back only slowed you down. Another cough, followed by what sounded like chattering teeth. Despite himself, Knox slowed. The sound carried a memory, himself at 12, shivering in that Queen's apartment when the heating broke down. His father had been gone by then, chasing some new charitable dream, leaving them to weather the cold alone. "Please." A tiny voice, barely a whisper. Knox stopped. Later he would try to understand why he turned around. Why, after 18 years of carefully trained indifference, he looked back. But in that moment, standing in the swirling snow, he simply turned. There, huddled in the shelter of a doorway, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing a thin jacket far too big for her small frame. Dark curls peeked out from under a ragged knit cap, framing a face that seemed to be made mostly of eyes, huge, brown, and filled with a wisdom no child should have to possess. Those eyes met his, and Knox felt something crack inside his chest. Like the first fissure in a frozen lake, warning of the depths below. The little girl's gaze held Knox rooted to the spot, snowflakes gathering on his shoulders. She didn't beg or reach out for help. She simply looked at him with those ancient eyes, as if she could see straight through his carefully constructed walls. Another cough shook her tiny frame. "Where are your parents?" The words came out harsher than he intended, brittle with defensive anger. What kind of people left a child alone in this weather? "Mama's sick." Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a slight southern lilt. "She's sleeping at the shelter, but they're full up. Said to come back tomorrow." She pulled the oversized jacket tighter around herself. "I'm Winter." Knox almost laughed at the cruel irony of her name. Of course she was Winter. This little girl who appeared like a spirit of the season itself, threatening to upset the careful order of his world. "You should walk away. You should call social services and let them handle it. You should." "You're shivering." Winter's observation cut through his thoughts. "Don't you have a scarf?" Knox blinked, his hand unconsciously touching the cashmere wrapped around his neck. Was this child actually worried about him? The absurdity of it, him standing there in clothes worth thousands while she huddled in cast-offs, struck him like a physical blow. "I'm fine," he said stiffly. "But you." He stopped, realizing he had no idea how to talk to a child. His world was boardrooms and binary code, not lost little girls with eyes too old for their faces. Winter coughed again, and this time Knox heard the rattle in her chest. Without thinking, he took off his scarf and stepped forward, kneeling to wrap it around her small shoulders. The cashmere looked ridiculous against her worn jacket, like putting a diamond necklace on a rag doll. "Your hands are cold," she said matter-of-factly, looking at his bare fingers. Before he could react, she took his much larger hand in both of her tiny ones as if trying to warm him up. The simple gesture of kindness. This child with nothing trying to help him, a man who had everything, made something twist painfully in his chest. A memory surfaced, sharp and unexpected. His father kneeling just like this, helping a homeless man put on a coat. Young Knox had watched from their car, not understanding why his father kept giving away things they could sell. "Sometimes, son," Phoenix had said later, "the richest people are the ones who have nothing left to lose." Knox had dismissed those words as the philosophy of a failure. But now, with Winter's small hands wrapped around his, they echoed with a different meaning. "My office is nearby," he heard himself saying. "We can call someone to help find your mother." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Winter. She studied him for a moment, head tilted like a curious bird. "Are you sure? You look awful busy." "Important people are always busy." A laugh escaped him, a real one, not the calculated chuckle he used in meetings. "I'm not that important." Winter stood up, still holding his hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yes, you are, she said with absolute certainty. But you're also very sad. I can tell because you have the same eyes as Mama when she thinks I'm sleeping. Knox felt the ice around his heart crack a little more. Standing up, he led Winter out of the alley, her small steps matching his now careful pace. The wind had died down, but the snow continued to fall, soft and steady, covering their tracks as they walked. He couldn't have known then how this simple act of kindness would ripple through his life, challenging everything he thought he knew about wealth and worth. He couldn't have known that this child named Winter would thaw the frozen wasteland he'd made of his heart. But as they walked through the swirling snow, something shifted in the universe of Knox Aldrich, like the first warm breeze of spring whispering through branches of ice. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The lobby of Aldrich Dynamics fell silent as Knox walked in with Winter. The security guard's jaw actually dropped. Knox could hear the sharp intake of breath from across the marble floor. He'd never brought anyone to the office without an appointment, let alone a small child in weathered clothes. Mr. Aldrich? Harper materialized from behind her desk, tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted between Knox and Winter, clearly trying to process this unprecedented situation. Should I cancel your remaining meetings? Yes. Knox felt Winter's hand tighten slightly in his. She was taking in the soaring ceiling, the abstract sculptures, the wall of windows. But unlike most people who entered this lobby for the first time, she showed no sign of being impressed. Instead she looked concerned. Your tree is hungry, Winter announced, pointing to the massive designer Christmas tree that dominated the lobby's center. It needs water and love. Trees can tell when nobody really wants them around. Knox glanced at the tree, a perfectly proportioned artificial pine decorated in metallic silver and blue, matching the building's cold aesthetic. He'd approved the design without really looking at it. Now, seeing it through Winter's eyes, he understood what she meant. It was beautiful but empty, like everything else in his carefully curated world. Harper, could you find some hot chocolate? Knox asked, surprising himself again. And maybe something to eat? Winter tugged his hand. Can she find 2 hot chocolates? You look like you need one too. Harper's professional mask cracked slightly, a small smile touching her lips. Right away, Mr. Aldrich. 2 hot chocolates. The private elevator ride to his office was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Winter seemed fascinated by the city lights growing smaller below them. The stars are upside down here, she said softly. In Tennessee they stay up in the sky where they belong. You're from Tennessee? Knox led her into his office, suddenly aware of how intimidating the space might seem to a child. The stark modernist furniture, the monochrome color scheme, the wall of windows showing the storm outside. It was designed to impress adults, not comfort lost little girls. But Winter moved through the space with the same quiet confidence she'd shown downstairs, trailing her fingers along the edge of his desk. Memphis, she said. But Mama said we had to leave cause of the bad times. She promised we'd go back when things got better. She picked up the face-down photo frame before Knox could stop her. Is this you? Knox started to reach for the photo, then stopped himself. Yes. A long time ago. You're smiling real big. Winter studied the image. Your daddy looks happy too. Where is he now? I don't know. The words came out before Knox could filter them. He left when things got bad. Like the bad times you mentioned. Winter nodded with that unnerving wisdom again. Mama says sometimes people leave 'cause they think it's better for everyone. But it just makes more sad instead. She set the photo upright on his desk. Maybe he misses your smile too. Harper arrived with the hot chocolate, served in Knox's expensive minimalist mugs that suddenly seemed ridiculously pretentious. Winter took hers with a polite thank you that spoke of good manners carefully taught. She cupped the mug in both hands, reminding Knox of how she'd tried to warm his fingers in the alley. Winter, we need to find your mother, Knox said, trying to focus on practical matters. Do you know which shelter she's staying at? The one by the big church with the blue door. But they won't let us both stay 'cause they're full up, and Mama said I should try to find somewhere warm while she rests 'cause her cough is real bad. Winter took a sip of hot chocolate, leaving a small mustache that made her look her age for once. She gave me her jacket and said she'd find me in the morning. The mixture of childish innocence and forced maturity in her words made Knox's throat tight. He remembered his own mother giving him her coat during that first winter after his father left, pretending she wasn't cold while they walked to the discount grocery store. "Harper," he called, knowing his assistant would be hovering nearby. "I need you to contact every shelter near churches in the city. Look for a woman from Memphis with a bad cough. She'll be missing her jacket." Winter smiled at him over her hot chocolate, and Knox felt that crack in his heart spread a little wider. "You're doing that thing with your eyes," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where they get soft instead of sharp. Like when you first saw me in the snow. It looks better on you than the sharp eyes." Knox turned to the windows, unsettled by how easily this child read him. The snow was falling harder now, erasing the city's edges. Somewhere out there, Winter's mother was sick and alone, trying to sleep in a strange place without even a jacket to keep her warm. "We'll find her," he said as much to himself as to Winter. "I promise." As Knox made calls and Harper coordinated with local shelters, Winter explored the office with quiet curiosity. She spent several minutes looking out at the snow, her breath fogging the floor-to-ceiling windows. Occasionally she'd draw simple patterns in the condensation: stars, hearts, small houses with crooked chimneys. "Your windows are crying," she observed, touching a place where condensation had gathered and run down the glass. "Mama says that means there's too much cold on one side and too much warm on the other. They're trying to make things even." Knox paused in the middle of a frustrated call with another shelter. Winter's words hit uncomfortably close to home, the imbalance between his heated office and the freezing world outside, between his wealth and her poverty, between his carefully maintained isolation and her open heart. "No sign of her at St. Michael's," Harper reported, entering with another round of hot chocolate. She'd been making calls for an hour, her usually pristine hair slightly disheveled from running her fingers through it. "But I've got contacts checking 3 more shelters near churches with blue doors." Winter had moved to Knox's desk, where she sat in his expensive ergonomic chair, feet dangling well above the floor. She'd been drawing on a piece of his company letterhead. Normally something that would have irritated him, but he found himself curious instead. "What are you drawing?" he asked, approaching to look over her shoulder. "Us," she said simply, holding up the paper. The crayon drawing showed 2 figures, a tall one in what appeared to be a suit, and a small one wearing an oversized jacket. They were holding hands. Above them, she'd drawn a Christmas tree with a face, smiling unlike the artificial one downstairs. "See? I made you stop frowning." Knox studied the drawing, noticing how she'd given his figure a red heart visible through the suit, like an X-ray. "Is that supposed to be my heart?" "Ah, it's bigger than you pretend it is." Winter added another star to the sky in her picture. "Like the Grinch, except you don't need to grow yours, you just need to remember it's there." A laugh bubbled up in Knox's throat, surprising him again. When was the last time he'd laughed twice in one day? "You've seen The Grinch?" "Mama reads me the book every Christmas. Even this year at the library before it closed." Winter's face grew serious. "She does all the voices even when her throat hurts. She says stories are like warm blankets for your heart." The mention of her mother sobered Knox. The storm was getting worse and they still hadn't found her. He could see the worry creeping into Winter's eyes, though she tried to hide it behind her wise little smile. "Mr. Aldrich?" Harper appeared in the doorway again. "I think we found her. Mount Sinai Hospital just admitted a woman matching the description. Brought in from the Trinity Church shelter with severe pneumonia." Winter's crayon dropped to the desk. "Mama sick?" Her voice suddenly matched her age, small and frightened. Without thinking, Knox scooped her up from his chair. She weighed almost nothing, her small body trembling slightly against his chest. "We'll go right now," he said. "Harper, have my car brought around." "The roads are terrible," Harper warned. "Most of the car services have suspended operations." Knox adjusted his hold on Winter, who had wrapped her arms around his neck. "Then call my helicopter. Mount Sinai has a landing pad." Harper's eyebrows shot up, but she was already dialing. Knox rarely used the company helicopter. It was meant for emergency business trips, not impromptu hospital visits. But looking down at Winter's worried face, he knew this couldn't wait. "Can helicopters fly in snow?" Winter whispered against his shoulder. "This one can," Knox assured her, surprised by how natural it felt to comfort her. "And we'll be there in minutes instead of hours." Winter pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes serious. "Promise you won't leave? When we find Mama?" The question pierced straight through Knox's defenses. This child who had known him for mere hours had already figured out his deepest fear: abandonment. She was afraid he would disappear, just like his father had, just like others in her young life probably had. I promise, he said, and for the first time in 18 years he meant something more than a business agreement. Let's go find your mama. The Aldridge Dynamics helicopter waited on the rooftop helipad, its blades already spinning against the snow. Winter's eyes went wide at the sight, but she showed no fear, only the same quiet fascination she'd had for everything else in Knox's world. She kept hold of his hand as they hurried through the swirling snow, her other arm clutching her, drawing close to her chest. Inside the helicopter, Knox helped buckle her into the seat beside him. The pilot, Chase, did a double take at seeing his boss with a small child but knew better than to ask questions. Knox could see him taking in Winter's worn clothes, the oversized jacket, the way she sat with perfect posture despite her feet not touching the floor. Ready for takeoff, Mr. Aldridge? Chase said through the headset. Weather's rough but manageable. Winter struggled a bit with her oversized headset until Knox reached over to adjust it. Your ears look funny, she giggled, pointing at his own headset. The sound of her laughter against the serious backdrop of the helicopter's interior struck Knox as wonderfully incongruous. Yours too, he found himself saying, tapping the huge earpiece that dwarfed her small head. Like Princess Leia. Who's Princess Leia? Knox stared at her in genuine shock. You've never seen Star Wars? The words came out before he could stop them, sounding ridiculously trivial given their current situation. Winter shook her head, then grabbed Knox's arm as the helicopter lifted off. Is she brave? Like Mama? Yes, Knox said softly, covering her small hand with his. Very brave. Like your mother, who gave you her jacket and faced the cold alone, he thought. The city spread out below them, a maze of lights blurred by snow. Winter pressed her face to the window, watching the world she knew transform into something magical. The buildings look like Mama's music boxes, she whispered. All lit up and sparkly. Your mother has music boxes? Had them. Back home. She used to wind them up every night before bed. Winter's voice grew quieter. We had to sell them when the bad times came. But she still hums the songs. Knox felt that familiar twist in his chest. He remembered his mother selling her jewelry, piece by piece, after his father left. The way she'd touch her empty wrist where her favorite bracelet used to be, humming to herself as if trying to replace what was lost with music. The hospital appeared ahead, its H-pad lights glowing through the snow. Winter's hand tightened on Knox's arm. Will Mama be awake? Will she be scared I wasn't there? She'll be proud you were so brave, Knox said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. And we'll tell her all about your helicopter ride. As they descended, Winter pulled out her drawing, adding something to it quickly before the landing gear touched down. Knox caught a glimpse of what looked like a helicopter in the sky above the two figures holding hands. The hospital staff was waiting with an umbrella when they disembarked. The head nurse's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Knox Aldridge stepping out of a private helicopter in a snowstorm, holding the hand of a little girl in an oversized jacket. Knox could practically see the headlines forming in her mind. We're here for a woman brought in from Trinity Church Shelter, he said, using his boardroom voice out of habit. Admitted with pneumonia. Are you family? The nurse asked, looking between them uncertainly. Before Knox could respond, Winter spoke up. He's my friend, she said with that simple, unshakable certainty that children possess. He helped me find Mama when the snow was angry. The nurse's face softened. Something in Winter's voice, or perhaps the way she held onto Knox's hand while clutching her drawing, seemed to convince her. Follow me, she said. Your mother's in the ICU but she's stabilized. She's been asking for you. As they walked through the sterile hospital corridors, Knox felt Winter's steps slow. She looked up at him, her big eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. What if she's really sick? What if she can't hum anymore? Knox knelt down to her level, right there in the middle of the hospital hallway. Then we'll help her get better, he said, making another promise he hadn't planned on. Whatever it takes. Winter nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around his neck in a surprise hug. Your heart's getting warmer, she whispered. I can feel it. Knox closed his eyes, holding her small frame carefully, aware of how fragile and precious this moment was. In just a few hours, this child had managed what 18 years of success couldn't. She'd found the human being he'd buried under all that ice. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Room 712 was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Winter's mother lay still against white sheets, her face almost as pale as the pillowcase beneath her dark curls, the same curls Winter had inherited. And 4 dripped steadily beside her bed, and her chest rose and fell with visible effort. Winter let go of Knox's hand for the first time since the alley, moving to her mother's bedside with careful steps. "Mama?" she whispered. The woman's eyes fluttered open, the same deep brown as Winter's but glazed with fever. "Baby?" Her voice was barely audible, rough with illness. "Is this a dream?" "No, Mama. I found help." Winter climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, showing her mother the drawing. "See? This is Mr. Knox. He has a helicopter and a sad Christmas tree and eyes that get soft sometimes." Knox hung back by the door, suddenly feeling like an intruder. Winter's mother, the nurse had called her Melody Rivers, focused on him with an effort. Despite her weakness, he could see her trying to assess him, to understand why a man in a $1,000 suit had brought her daughter to her bedside. "Winter has a way of seeing people," Melody said softly, her southern accent more pronounced than her daughter's. "Even when they're trying not to be seen." "She found me in the snow," Knox said, then corrected himself. "No, I found her. Or maybe—" He trailed off, realizing he wasn't sure anymore who had really found whom. Melody started to speak but was overcome by a coughing fit that shook her entire frame. Winter immediately reached for the water cup by the bed, helping her mother drink with the practiced care of a child who had grown up too fast. Knox watched the gentle way Winter supported her mother's head, how she waited patiently for each sip, and felt something shift inside him again. "The doctor says you have pneumonia," Winter informed her mother seriously. "But Mr. Knox promised we'd help you get better." She looked back at Knox with complete trust, and he felt the weight of that promise settle more firmly on his shoulders. Melody's eyes sharpened despite her fever. "That's very kind, but we can't accept." "Yes, you can," Knox interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'm having you transferred to the private wing. The best pulmonologist in the city is already on her way." "You don't understand," Melody tried again, her breath wheezing slightly. "Our insurance doesn't matter." Knox moved closer to the bed, drawn by some force he didn't quite understand. "None of that matters right now." Winter beamed at him as if he'd just confirmed something she'd known all along. She patted the bed beside her, and Knox found himself sitting down, the expensive fabric of his suit brushing against the worn hospital blanket. "Tell Mama about the crying windows," Winter urged. "And the hungry Christmas tree." So Knox found himself telling the story of their afternoon, watching Melody's face as Winter chimed in with her own observations. The fever flush in Melody's cheeks couldn't hide how thin she was, how exhausted. Knox could see the toll that months of hardship had taken, but he could also see where Winter got her quiet strength. Even sick and worried, Melody's focus was entirely on her daughter, her hand never leaving Winter's small one. "You've got a creative spark, baby," Melody said when Winter showed her the drawing again. "Like your daddy had." Something flickered in her eyes, an old pain, quickly hidden. "Did he like drawing too?" Knox asked carefully. "He was a musician. Had a small studio in Memphis, taught guitar." Melody's voice grew distant. "When he died, the medical bills? Well, that's when the bad times started. But we kept his guitar." She looked at Winter with fierce love. "Some things are worth more than money." Knox felt the words like a physical blow. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "The richest people are the ones who have nothing left to lose." He'd always thought that was just another of Phoenix Aldridge's philosophical excuses for failure. But watching Melody and Winter together, seeing how they held on to love and hope despite losing everything else, he began to understand. Winter had curled up against her mother's side, careful of the 4 lines, her eyes starting to droop. The excitement and stress of the day were finally catching up with her. "Can you hum the music box song, Mama?" she asked sleepily. Melody tried, but the melody turned into another cough. Without thinking, Knox pulled out his phone and quickly searched. A moment later, the soft tones of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" filled the room. Winter smiled, her eyes closing. "That was her father's favorite," Melody whispered, stroking Winter's curls. "He used to play it on guitar while she fell asleep." Knox watched them together, this mother and daughter who had lost everything but each other, and felt the last of his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. He'd spent 18 years believing that wealth was the only protection against life's cruelties. But here in this hospital room, witnessing a love that no hardship could break, he realized how poor he'd made himself by hiding from his own heart. As Winter slept curled against her mother, Knox stepped into the hallway to make calls. His voice, usually sharp with commands, took on a different tone as he arranged for Melody's transfer to the private wing, coordinated with specialists, and ensured every possible comfort would be provided. Harper, still at the office despite the late hour, handled each request with quiet efficiency. "One more thing," Knox said, glancing back through the door at Winter's sleeping form. "Find out what happened to their belongings in Memphis. The guitar especially, her father's guitar." "Sir?" Harper's voice held a note of surprise. This wasn't the Knox Aldrich who'd walked into the office that morning. "Just find it. Whatever it costs." He ended the call and leaned against the wall, loosening his tie. The events of the day felt surreal. Had it really been only hours ago that he'd been celebrating another quarter of record profits? A soft sound from the room drew him back inside. Melody was awake, watching him with those same perceptive eyes her daughter had inherited. "You don't have to do all this," she said quietly, careful not to wake Winter. Knox sat in the chair beside her bed. "Yes, I do." He looked at Winter, at the way she still clutched her drawing even in sleep. "Your daughter, she sees things. Things I've been trying not to see for a very long time." Melody smiled weakly. "She's always been that way. Even as a baby, she could tell when someone needed a smile or a hug. Her daddy used to say she had an old soul and a brand new heart." Another cough shook her, but she waved away Knox's concern. "Tell me something. Why were you out in that storm today?" The question caught Knox off guard. "I was getting coffee." "No," Melody shook her head slightly. "Why were you really out there? What were you running from?" Knox started to give his usual deflection, but something in Melody's gentle gaze stopped him. "My mother called. About a charity ball. I'd been avoiding it because—" He trailed off, realizing how petty his reasons seemed now. "Because giving means being vulnerable," Melody finished for him. "And you've spent a long time building walls against that. How did you?" "Winter's not the only one who can see past walls." Melody's voice was tired but kind. "You remind me of Winter's father in some ways. He built walls too, tried to keep the world out. But Winter would just climb right over them, make him laugh when he thought he'd forgotten how." Knox felt that familiar twist in his chest. "What was his name?" "Mason. Mason Rivers. He taught music to kids who couldn't afford lessons, let them pay what they could." She smiled at the memory. "That's actually how we met. I was working 3 jobs to pay for my little sister's guitar lessons. He caught me crying in the hallway one day because I was going to have to tell her we couldn't afford it anymore." Her voice softened. "Instead of accepting payment, he offered me a job at the studio. Said my voice was too pretty to waste on tears." The love in her voice made Knox think of the photo on his desk, his father's proud smile, his own gap-toothed grin. "What happened after he died?" "The medical bills came first. Then the mortgage. The studio had been running on Mason's passion more than profit." Melody stroked Winter's curls gently. "I tried to keep it going but, well, you can't pay bills with good intentions. When they foreclosed on the studio, we lost our home too. It was all tied together." Knox thought about the ruthless efficiency with which he'd foreclosed on countless properties over the years, never considering the stories behind the numbers. How many other families had he broken apart without a second thought? Winter stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about helicopters and Christmas trees. Melody soothed her with a gentle touch, and Knox watched the simple gesture with a tightness in his throat. "I have a proposition for you," he said suddenly, the idea forming even as he spoke. "Not charity, a business opportunity." Melody raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Aldrich Dynamics has been looking to expand into creative technology. Music production software, digital learning platforms." Knox leaned forward, his mind racing ahead. "We need someone who understands both the technical and human side of music education. Someone who's been in the trenches, who knows what teachers and students really need." "Mr. Aldrich." "Knox," he corrected. "And I'm serious. The salary would be competitive, full benefits, flexible hours. And—" he hesitated, then pushed ahead. "We could look into reopening the studio in Memphis as a pilot program for community outreach." Melody's eyes filled with tears. "What? You don't even know us." Knox looked at Winter, still peaceful in sleep, then back at Melody. "Because your daughter reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. Success isn't just about what you can take. Sometimes it's about what you can give back." He smiled slightly. "And please don't tell me you can't accept. Winter would be very disappointed in me if I didn't keep my promise to help." A small smile tugged at Melody's lips. "She does have a way of holding people to their best selves, doesn't she?" "Yes," Knox agreed, watching the snow fall outside the hospital window. Yes, she does. The next few hours passed in a blur of doctors, nurses, and quiet conversations. Knox worked from his phone, orchestrating arrangements with the same intensity he usually reserved for corporate takeovers. Harper sent regular updates. The private suite would be ready within the hour, the pulmonologist was reviewing Melody's case, and, most surprisingly, she'd located Mason Rivers' guitar in a Memphis pawn shop. Winter woke briefly during the transfer to the private wing, her eyes widening at the spacious room with its plush furnishings and panoramic view of the snow-covered city. "It looks like a castle," she whispered, still half asleep. "Rest, baby," Melody said softly, her own voice stronger after the new medication. "Everything's okay now." Knox watched from the doorway as Winter drifted back to sleep in the comfortable pull-out bed beside her mother. The drawing was still clutched in her small hand, slightly crumpled now but somehow more precious for its worn edges. He thought about the pristine artwork in his office, worth millions but carrying none of the simple truth of Winter's crayon creation. His phone buzzed, another message from his mother about the charity ball. For the first time in years, he opened it instead of deleting it. "Knox, darling, I know you're busy, but these children need our help. Your father, despite his mistakes, understood that giving back is what makes us truly human. I miss that part of him. And sometimes I miss that part of you too. Love, Mom." Knox's throat tightened. He looked at Winter and Melody, thinking about how close they'd come to being separated by the storm, by poverty, by a system that too often overlooked the human stories behind the statistics. How many other families were out there right now, holding on to each other through their own storms? "You're thinking very loudly," Melody observed from her bed. Her color was better, though exhaustion still lined her face. Knox moved to sit beside her. "I've been thinking about the studio. Not just reopening it but expanding the concept. A network of community music centers, using technology to connect students and teachers across the country. Free lessons for kids who can't afford them. Like a digital version of what Mason dreamed of," Melody said softly. "But sustainable this time. Backed by corporate resources, but run by people who understand the mission. People like you." Knox leaned forward, his business instincts merging with this new, unfamiliar feeling of wanting to help. "We could call it the Mason Rivers Initiative." Tears slipped down Melody's cheeks. He would have loved that. Not the recognition but the idea of reaching more kids, giving them a chance to find their music. "Then help me make it happen." Knox surprised himself with the urgency in his voice. Not just for Winter or Mason's memory, but for all the other families trying to hold on to their dreams through the bad times. Winter stirred in her sleep, humming a few notes of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." The sound made both adults smile. "You know," Melody said thoughtfully, "Winter asked me once why music boxes only play when you open them. I told her it's because the most beautiful things happen when we open ourselves up." She looked at Knox knowingly. Sometimes it takes a special key to unlock what's been closed for too long. Knox thought about the ice around his heart, how it had started to thaw the moment Winter looked at him with those wise eyes. "She's rather good at picking emotional locks," he admitted. "Just like her daddy." Melody's voice held pride mixed with old pain. "He could always find the music in broken things." A soft knock interrupted them. Harper stood in the doorway holding a familiar-looking case. "Special delivery from Memphis," she said quietly. Knox stood to take the guitar case, noting the worn leather and faded stickers that told stories of its past. When he opened it, the instrument inside gleamed softly in the dim light, well-loved but still beautiful, like a memory given physical form. "Mason's guitar," Melody breathed, her hand reaching out to touch the smooth wood. "How did you?" "Let's just say some things are worth whatever they cost," Knox said, echoing her earlier words. He placed the guitar carefully beside her bed. "Winter should have a piece of her father's music to hold on to." "And what about you?" Melody asked gently. "What piece of your father are you holding on to?" Knox thought about the photo on his desk, about his mother's message, about all the years he'd spent running from anything that resembled his father's idealism. "Maybe it's time I stopped holding on to the hurt and started remembering the good parts. The parts about giving back, about seeing people as more than numbers on a spreadsheet." "The parts that Winter sees in you," Melody added. "Yes," Knox agreed, watching the snow fall outside. "The parts that were there all along, just waiting for the right kind of magic to thaw them out." If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. Dawn broke over New York City, painting the snow-covered buildings in shades of rose and gold. Knox stood at the window of the hospital suite, his suit wrinkled from the night spent in a chair, watching the city wake up. Everything looked different somehow, cleaner, more alive, as if the storm had washed away more than just dirt from the streets. He'd spent the early hours making calls to his board members, outlining his vision for the Mason Rivers Initiative. Some had been skeptical at first. Community music programs were hardly the cutting-edge tech investments they were used to. But Knox spoke with a passion they'd never heard before, painting a picture of innovation merged with social impact that could revolutionize music education. Mr. Knox. Winter's sleepy voice drew his attention from the window. She'd woken up and was padding toward him in the hospital slippers a nurse had brought, her curls wild from sleep. Is that really Daddy's guitar? Knox knelt down beside her as she approached the instrument, her small fingers hovering over the strings as if afraid it might disappear. Yes, it is. Your mom says you're going to learn to play it someday. Can I touch it? When Knox nodded, she carefully plucked one string, the note hanging in the quiet morning air. Her eyes filled with tears. Mama says Daddy used to make it sing like angels. And now you can make it sing too. Knox helped her gently strum the strings, showing her how to position her small fingers. Music has a way of keeping people with us even when they're gone. Winter looked up at him with those soul-deep eyes. Is that why you stopped playing? Because it reminded you too much of someone gone? Knox's hands stilled on the guitar. How did you? Your hands, Winter said simply. They move like they remember music. Like mamas do. Knox sat back, surprised once again by her perception. He hadn't touched a piano in 18 years, not since his father left. The grand piano in their old house had been the last thing they'd sold. He still remembered Phoenix's hands dancing over the keys, teaching him jazz standards and show tunes. My father taught me piano, he admitted. We used to play together every evening. Do you miss it? Knox started to give his usual deflection, then stopped. Yes, I miss it every day. Melody stirred in her bed, watching them with a soft smile. Her fever had broken during the night, and color was returning to her cheeks. Music has a way of healing what's broken, she said. Mason always said that. Winter carefully set the guitar back in its case, then climbed into Knox's lap, an act so natural and trusting that it made his heart ache. Can we get a piano? For when Mama's better and we do the music thing you talked about. The studio will need one, Knox agreed, finding himself smiling. Maybe I could even play sometimes. A duet. Winter clapped her hands. Like me and Mama do with singing. She does the high parts and I do the low parts. Knox caught Melody's eye over Winter's head, seeing understanding there. They both knew how much more than music he was agreeing to. This was about opening up, about letting people in, about finding harmony in unexpected places. His phone buzzed again. The board had unanimously approved the Mason Rivers Initiative, with a budget that made Knox's earlier promise of whatever it costs seem modest. But more importantly, his mother had replied to his late-night message about attending the charity ball. Bring them, she'd written. Bring them both. It's time this family remembered how to give with an open heart. Winter was examining his tie, which had come loose during the night. With careful concentration, she straightened it, her small hands smoothing the silk. There, she said proudly. Now you look like you remember how to smile. Knox touched the tie, thinking about how this simple gesture of care meant more than all the expensive clothes he'd ever worn. You know what? I think I'm starting to remember a lot of things. Through the window, the morning sun caught the falling snow, turning each flake into a tiny prism. Winter gasped at the display, pressing her hands against the glass. Look, the sky is sharing its sparkles. Knox watched the light dance through the snow, holding this child who had somehow melted years of frozen feelings in a single day. He thought about his father, about Mason Rivers, about all the different ways people could be rich or poor. Maybe it was time to stop counting his wealth in dollars and start measuring it in moments like this. In small hands straightening his tie, in guitars recovered from pawn shops, in the chance to help dreams take flight. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Melody's condition improved rapidly under the care of the city's best doctors, though Knox suspected Winter's presence was the most powerful medicine. The little girl alternated between curling up with her mother, practicing gentle strums on her father's guitar, and following Knox around the hospital room as he worked, asking questions about everything. Why do you frown at your computer? She asked, watching him respond to emails. Does it tell you sad stories? Knox caught himself mid-frown and consciously relaxed his face. No, just boring ones. Numbers and meetings. Maybe they need more colors, Winter suggested, sliding her latest drawing across his laptop keyboard. This one showed the three of them, Knox, Melody, and Winter, standing in front of what appeared to be a building filled with musical notes. Like our new studio. Knox carefully added the drawing to the growing collection. Winter had been ecstatic about the Mason Rivers initiative, especially when Knox explained how they'd help other kids learn music. She'd spent hours drawing pictures of what she thought it should look like, each one featuring impossibly bright colors and smiling faces. Mr. Aldrich? Harper appeared in the doorway carrying garment bags. The items you requested for tomorrow night's charity ball. Winter perked up immediately. Knox had explained about the ball that morning, and she'd been enchanted by the idea of a real-life princess party, as she called it. Her expression now, watching Harper hang up the garment bags, was a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Can I peek?" she whispered to Knox. He nodded, and Winter carefully unzipped the smallest bag, gasping at what was inside. The dress was perfect for a 7-year-old's fantasy, pale blue with subtle sparkles, like freshly fallen snow in sunlight. Not overdone or flashy, but magical in its simplicity. "It's like frozen starlight." Winter breathed, touching the fabric reverently. "Winter, honey," Melody called from her bed, where she'd been watching with a mix of emotions on her face. "We can't accept." "Yes, we can, Mama," Winter interrupted with surprising firmness. "Mr. Knox promised to help, remember? And you said we have to let people help sometimes, like how Daddy used to help his students." She turned those wise eyes on her mother. "And look, your dress matches mine." Melody's dress was indeed a deeper shade of the same blue, elegant but comfortable enough for someone still recovering. Knox had made sure everything was perfect. The clothes, the private car service he'd arranged, the medical staff who would be discreetly present at the ball to monitor Melody's health. "Besides," Knox added softly, "my mother specifically requested you both come. And I've learned it's best not to disappoint wise women who see right through you." He smiled at Winter, who beamed back. Later that evening, after Winter had fallen asleep curled up in the window seat with her father's guitar nearby, Melody motioned Knox over to her bed. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" she said, her voice gentle. "The dresses, the studio, even having doctors at the ball. You're used to controlling every detail." Knox started to defend himself, then realized she wasn't criticizing. Yes. It's how I've always operated. If you control everything, nothing can hurt you." "And how's that working out?" Melody's eyes sparkled with knowing humor. Knox looked at Winter's sleeping form, at the drawings scattered across his laptop, at the guitar that now stood as a symbol of both past and future. "Not as well as I thought. Your daughter has a way of making plans fall apart in the best possible way." "She does that," Melody agreed. "Just like her father. Mason used to say music isn't about control, it's about letting go enough to let the magic in." She took Knox's hand, surprising him. "Thank you. Not just for the things you can buy, but for letting her work her magic on you. For letting yourself be changed." Knox squeezed her hand gently, thinking about the next evening's ball. He'd attended dozens of charity events over the years, always staying just long enough to be seen, never letting himself connect with the actual purpose. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow he would walk in with Winter's small hand in his, carrying her drawings of a future filled with music and color. "You know what's strange?" he said quietly. "For the first time in 18 years, I'm actually looking forward to playing the piano again. The ball has this grand Steinway, and Winter asked if I would play something." He trailed off, embarrassed by how much it meant to him. "It's not strange at all," Melody said softly. "Sometimes we need a child's eyes to see the simple truths we've forgotten. Like how music can heal. How giving can make you richer. How love is worth any risk." Outside, the last traces of sunset painted the snow-covered city in shades of promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, new chances to prove that the changes in Knox's heart were real and lasting. But for now, in this quiet hospital room with Winter's gentle breathing and Melody's understanding smile, Knox felt something he hadn't experienced since he was 12 years old. The simple joy of being part of a family. The charity ball transformed the Plaza Hotel's ballroom into a winter wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over ice sculptures and silver decorations, while a massive Christmas tree, a real one, Knox noted with a smile, dominated one corner. But none of it compared to the look of wonder on Winter's face as she entered, one hand holding Knox's, the other clutching her mother's. "It's like a dream," Winter whispered, her blue dress catching the light as she twirled carefully. She'd insisted on wearing her father's guitar pick on a ribbon around her neck, for luck. she'd said. Melody looked elegant but slightly nervous, her recovery evident in her straight posture but visible in the careful way she moved. The medical team Knox had arranged stood discreetly nearby, though Winter had done a better job of ensuring her mother didn't overexert herself than any doctor could. Knox. A familiar voice made him turn. His mother, Elizabeth Aldridge, stood there in a silver evening gown, her eyes moving from Knox to Winter to Melody with barely concealed emotion. "Are you going to introduce me?" Before Knox could speak, Winter stepped forward with a small curtsy that she must have practiced in secret. "I'm Winter Rivers and this is my mama, Melody. Your son found us in the snow and helped us remember how to be warm again." Elizabeth's composed socialite mask cracked completely. She knelt down to Winter's level, something Knox hadn't seen her do since he was a child. Did he now? That sounds exactly like something his father would have done. "Mom," Knox started, but Elizabeth held up a hand. "No, darling, let me finish. Your father made mistakes, terrible ones that hurt us all. But his heart was always in the right place." She touched Winter's guitar pick pendant gently. "He believed in the power of music too." Winter's eyes lit up. "Mr. Knox is going to play the piano tonight," he promised. "And guess what? We're going to open music schools for kids who can't afford lessons, just like my daddy used to do." Elizabeth looked at Knox sharply, hope and surprise mingling in her expression. "The Mason Rivers Initiative," he explained quietly. "It's time Aldrich Dynamics started measuring success in more than just dollars." The grand Steinway waited on a small stage, its black surface reflecting the chandelier light. Winter tugged Knox's hand, pointing to it. "Is it time? You said after dinner, but I don't think I can wait that long to hear you play." Knox felt dozens of eyes on him, board members, society friends, business rivals, all wondering what had happened to the infamous Ice King of Tech. Let them wonder. You know what? Neither can I. He led Winter to the piano, lifting her onto the bench beside him. The ballroom quieted as he opened the lid, revealing keys he hadn't touched in 18 years. Winter placed her small hand over his. "Don't be scared," she whispered. "Daddy's guitar pick will help with the magic." Knox took a deep breath and began to play. The melody of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" filled the room, but not the simple version he'd played on his phone in the hospital. This was how his father had taught him to play it, with jazz chords and gentle improvisation, letting the music breathe and flow. Winter swayed beside him, humming softly, while Melody moved closer, her eyes shining with tears. As he played, Knox felt years of frozen emotions thawing with each note. He saw his father at their old piano, teaching him about harmony and heart. He saw Mason Rivers giving free lessons to children who needed music more than money. He saw himself at 12, building walls that a 7-year-old girl would finally break down with nothing but wisdom and love. The song ended, its final notes hanging in the air like snowflakes. The silence that followed felt electric, full of possibility. Then Winter started to clap, her small hands breaking the spell, and the entire ballroom joined in. "That was Daddy's favorite," Winter said as they returned to where Melody and Elizabeth stood. "And now it's my favorite too because it helped you remember how to make music again." Elizabeth wiped tears from her eyes. "Phoenix would be so proud," she whispered to Knox. "Of all of this." Knox looked at Winter, who was now showing Melody and Elizabeth her latest drawing, explaining her plans for the music schools with complete confidence. He thought about how a chance encounter in a snowstorm had changed everything. How this little girl had taught him that the truest wealth wasn't in what you could hold, but in what could hold you. "I think," he said softly, "I'm finally proud too." If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. The evening flowed like a perfect melody after that. Knox found himself doing something he'd never done at these events before. Actually enjoying himself. Winter charmed everyone she met, her natural wisdom and innocence cutting through the usual social pretenses of Manhattan's elite. She convinced 3 CEOs to donate to the Mason Rivers Initiative simply by asking them if they remembered their favorite childhood songs. "Music is like hugs for your ears," she explained to a particularly stern-looking venture capitalist, who found himself nodding along. "Don't you think everyone deserves hugs?" Melody watched her daughter work her magic from a comfortable seat near the Christmas tree, where she alternated between talking with Elizabeth about their shared love of classical music and fielding questions from curious socialites about the new initiative. Knox noticed how she never once made their story sound pitiful or tragic. She spoke of Mason's legacy with pride, of their struggles with dignity, and of the future with quiet hope. "Your mother is quite remarkable," Elizabeth said, joining Knox at the dessert table where he was helping Winter select a cookie. "She reminds me of how I felt after your father left, trying to stay strong, to rebuild, to keep faith in goodness despite everything." Winter looked up from her careful cookie deliberation. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who know it's okay to need help," she said, then added, "The chocolate one has more chips, Mr. Knox." Knox handed her the chocolate cookie, marveling at how she could switch between profound wisdom and childlike simplicity in the space of a breath. "Is that something else your daddy used to say?" "No." Winter took a bite of cookie, leaving crumbs on her sparkly dress. "That's what Mama says when I ask why we had to leave Memphis. She says being strong isn't about never falling down, it's about knowing who'll help you back up." Elizabeth touched Knox's arm gently. "She's right, you know. I should have helped you back up all those years ago instead of letting you build those walls. I was so focused on my own pain." "Mom, no," Knox interrupted. "We both did what we thought we had to do to survive. But maybe—" He watched Winter carefully brushing cookie crumbs off her dress. "Maybe survival isn't enough anymore. Maybe it's time to really live again." The band started playing a waltz and Winter's eyes lit up. "Can we dance? Mama taught me how to twirl without getting dizzy." Knox found himself being pulled onto the dance floor by a 7-year-old girl in a starlight blue dress, her father's guitar pick bouncing against her collar as she moved. He lifted her up so she could stand on his shoes, like his father had once done for him, and they swayed to the music. "Your heart's gotten so much warmer," Winter observed, her head resting against his chest. "It's not frozen at all anymore." "Thanks to you," Knox said softly. "You and your mother showed me what really matters." "What's that?" Knox looked around the ballroom, seeing it all with new eyes. His mother dancing with the venture capitalist, both of them laughing as they discussed potential funding for music education. Melody at the piano now, playing a gentle Memphis blues while a group of entranced guests listened. The real Christmas tree decorated with children's wishes from local shelters. Wishes that were all being granted tonight, many times over. "Love," he answered simply. "Love and music, and having the courage to let both of them change you." Winter smiled up at him, that wise old soul shining through her young eyes. "That's what Daddy's guitar pick was trying to tell you all along. Sometimes you just have to listen really hard to hear the important things." As they danced, snow began falling outside the ballroom's tall windows. But this time Knox didn't feel any chill. How could he, with his heart so full of warmth? The little girl he'd found in a snowstorm had given him back something he thought he'd lost forever. The ability to see magic in the world, to find music in unexpected places, to let love in despite the risk of pain. And as Winter hummed along to the waltz, her small hands holding on to him with complete trust, Knox knew that every frozen wall he'd built had been worth breaking, just to reach this moment of perfect harmony. 3 months later, Knox stood in the renovated Memphis studio, watching Winter give her first guitar lesson. Her student was a shy 10-year-old named Marcus, whose mother worked 3 jobs just like Melody once had. Winter sat cross-legged on the floor with him, showing him how to hold her father's guitar with the same care she'd been taught. "See? Your fingers go here like they're giving the strings a tiny hug," Winter explained, her patience remarkable for a 7-year-old. "That's how Daddy taught Mama and how Mama taught me, and now I'm teaching you." The studio had transformed from Mason Rivers' humble dream into something that would have made him proud. Modern recording equipment shared space with well-loved instruments. The walls featured a mix of platinum records and children's artwork. A state-of-the-art computer lab allowed for virtual lessons connecting kids across the country, while the main room maintained the warm, welcoming feel of a home where music lived. Melody, now fully recovered and thriving in her role as executive director, was leading a group of potential donors through the facility. Her presentation was interrupted by occasional bursts of musical experimentation from the practice rooms, beautiful chaos that made her smile every time. "We've already enrolled 300 students in our free lesson program," she was saying, her voice full of quiet pride. "And thanks to our online platform, we're reaching children in rural areas who never had access to music education before." Knox watched her from his office doorway, marveling at how naturally she'd stepped into this leadership role. The same strength that had kept her going through the hard times now powered her determination to help other families avoid similar struggles. She caught his eye and smiled, a warm look that made him feel like part of something bigger than himself. His own office was different from the one in New York. Instead of stark modernism, it featured comfortable furniture and walls covered in Winter's drawings. The latest showed their expanding musical family: Knox at the piano, Melody singing, Winter with her guitar, and dozens of small figures representing all the children they were helping. The grand piano in the corner had pride of place. Knox found himself playing more and more these days, usually with Winter as his audience. She had an uncanny knack for requesting songs that unlocked memories he thought he'd buried forever. Happy ones of his father teaching him jazz chords, of his mother singing along while she cooked dinner, of a time before money became more important than music. "Mr. Knox." Winter's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Come see. Marcus learned a whole chord already." Knox joined them on the floor, watching as Marcus carefully formed a G chord. The boy's face lit up when he strummed and a clean sound rang out. "That's the sound dreams make," Winter declared with her usual wisdom. "Right, Mr. Knox?" "Right," Knox agreed, remembering the sound of his own dreams thawing that night in the hospital. "And speaking of dreams, isn't it time to show Marcus our secret project?" Winter bounced up excitedly. "The music boxes. Can we, Mama?" she called to Melody, who nodded her permission. They led Marcus to a special room where dozens of restored music boxes lined the shelves. Some from antique shops, others donated by families with stories to share. Winter had insisted on creating this space after learning about Melody's old collection. "So no one has to sell their music to get through the bad times," she'd explained. "Pick one," Winter told Marcus. "When you practice at home you can wind it up and play along. The music box will be like a tiny teacher, reminding you that you're never alone." Knox watched Marcus select a box that played Amazing Grace. His eyes wide with wonder as Winter demonstrated how to open it, how to wind it carefully, how to let the music tell its story. This was what his father had tried to teach him all those years ago, that true wealth wasn't in possessions but in what you chose to share. Elizabeth visited often, helping to organize benefit concerts and maintaining the growing collection of music boxes. She and Melody had become close friends, sharing stories about raising children alone and finding strength in unexpected places. The wall between Knox's business world and his personal life had dissolved, replaced by a harmony he never knew he needed. "Your daddy would be so proud," Knox overheard Melody telling Winter one evening as they closed up the studio. "Not just of the music you're making but of the love you're sharing." Winter had smiled that wise little smile of hers. "He knows," she'd said confidently. "He sends us messages in the music boxes and the guitar strings and Mr. Knox's piano songs. Love doesn't ever really go away, it just changes into different kinds of music." Looking at her now, teaching Marcus with the same gentle patience that had melted his own frozen heart, Knox understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes the greatest fortune wasn't what you could count, but what you could count on. Sometimes the richest melodies came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes it took a child's wisdom to remind a millionaire that the truest wealth was measured in moments of grace, in songs of healing, in the courage to let love write new music in your heart. 1 year to the day after that fateful snowstorm, Knox stood in the center of the Memphis studio's main room, surrounded by children practicing their instruments. The wall behind him displayed a large photograph, Winter in her blue dress from the charity ball, sitting at the piano with Knox, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. Beside it hung her original crayon drawing of them in the snow, carefully framed. Winter herself was at the grand piano, teaching a younger student the same song that had changed everything, "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." Her father's guitar pick still hung around her neck, but now it was joined by a small silver music box charm Knox had given her for her 8th birthday. "Remember," she told her student with that ancient wisdom that hadn't faded, "music isn't just in your fingers, it's in your heart." That's what my daddy wrote in his teaching journal. The journal had been another treasure they'd recovered, full of Mason's thoughts about music and teaching. Melody had cried when Knox presented it to her, found in an old filing cabinet at the foreclosed studio. Now its words of wisdom helped guide their growing program, which had expanded to 5 cities and reached thousands of children. Knox's phone buzzed, a message from his father. They'd reconnected 6 months ago, after Phoenix read about the Mason Rivers initiative in the news. Their relationship was still healing, note by note, but they were learning to play in harmony again. Just like the music boxes in Winter's special room, some melodies needed time to be wound up again. "Mr. Knox," Winter called out. "Tell everyone the snow story. The one about how sometimes the coldest days can bring the warmest changes." Knox smiled, gathering the children around as Melody and Elizabeth joined them. The story had become something of a legend at the studio, how a millionaire with a frozen heart met a little girl with an old soul in the middle of a snowstorm, and how they saved each other in different ways. You know what I learned that day? Knox asked the gathered children. I learned that the richest person isn't the one with the most money, but the one with the most love to give. Winter and her mother taught me that real wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you share. Like music, one of the younger students piped up. Exactly like music, Knox agreed. Because when you share a song you still get to keep it in your heart. And when you share love, it only grows stronger. Winter played a soft chord on the piano. And sometimes, she added, the best gifts come on the hardest days. Like snow that looks cold but makes everything beautiful. Knox looked around at what that snow had helped create. Not just a music school but a family. Children finding their voices, parents finding hope, teachers finding purpose. His own mother sitting beside Melody, both of them smiling as Winter played. The photographs and artwork on the walls telling stories of lives changed by melody and love. You see, Knox concluded, speaking as much to himself as to the children, life's greatest symphony isn't played in concert halls or recorded in expensive studios. It's played in the moments we choose love over fear, giving over taking, and courage over comfort. Every act of kindness is a note in this symphony, every shared smile a chord, every helping hand a harmony. Winter joined in, her voice carrying that simple truth that had first pierced his frozen heart. And the most magical thing? There's always room for more music, more love, more dreams. Just like Daddy always said, as long as we have songs to share, no one is ever truly poor. As if to prove her point, she began to play Somewhere Over the Rainbow again, and one by one, other instruments joined in, guitars, violins, even voices. The melody filled the studio like sunshine after storm clouds, like warmth after winter, like love after loneliness. And in that moment, watching Winter lead this impromptu orchestra with joy in her eyes, Knox realized that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or stock prices. It was measured in the courage to open your heart, the wisdom to learn from unexpected teachers, and the strength to let love write new songs in your life. Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of life's simplest truths, that every heart can thaw, every dream can soar, and every storm can bring a rainbow, if we just have the courage to look up and believe. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to share it with others who might need a reminder about what truly matters in life. Your comments mean the world to us. Let us know how this story resonated with you and share your own experiences of unexpected moments that changed everything. And if you'd like to support more stories like this, consider using the Super Thanks button below. Every contribution helps us continue bringing you these messages of hope, love, and the power of human connection. Remember, like Winter says, there's always room for more music, more love, more dreams. Thank you for being part of our story.